Hello, everyone. Welcome to our generative AI webinar. I'm Emily Elizabeth. I'm here from Onspring. We are a GRC automation software tool. We are known for making lives easier in the risk compliance and information security space. And I've got a couple guests here with us today who are sharing a presentation with us about ChatGPT, generative AI, what you need to think about before you start using it and how you can start using it. So they're going to get into the weeds of this presentation, but a couple housekeeping things for today. Yes, we are recording this, so we'll send everybody a recording of this webinar when we're done. If you want to share it with friends, colleagues, start a dialogue with some of your peers about what you think about how we can use generative AI in governance, risk, and compliance. We are taking questions today. I have a feeling there will be quite a few of them based on this subject matter. If you have a question, drop it in the Q&A, which is in the right-hand side of your screen, and we will get to them at the end of the session and get through as many as we can. So we are not doing an overview of what generative AI is and all of the technical components of it. There are a lot of sessions about that right now. Instead, this talk is much more focused on practical uses and how you can start applying it in what you're doing today to add value back to your organization and your role. So that is very much the focus of this talk today. If you have thoughts or suggestions on how you think you could use generative AI in your organization, we always encourage some of those ideas. Drop them in the chat. We've got a couple that we're going to talk through today and love to expand it to you. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Andrew Gunter and Jason Wolf from Essential, who is going to be leading our presentation. So I'm going to let you guys get started.
Thank you, Emily. Really appreciate the introduction. As Emily mentioned, my name's Andrew Gunter. I am a partner with Essential. We are a boutique consulting firm that helps organizations build out enterprise risk and compliance programs, as well as enable GRC technology to support it like Onspring. I've been in the GRC industry now for 10 plus years, helping organizations both implement, build out roadmaps, build out programs, as well as I've been a customer on the other side, where I've actually been inside the industry where I built the GRC program and helped build out the governance of it. With me today is Jason. Jason, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, yeah, thanks Andrew, and thanks for joining us today. So my name is Jason Rolfe, as Andrew mentioned. I'm a director here with Central Consulting. I've been in the GRC world either as a practitioner or a consultant or as a working in the software world for the full breadth of my career, about 25 years or so. So definitely a place that I enjoy being a part of, something that I'm really excited to talk about with you all today. So really appreciate everyone being with us today.
So let's jump in. Today we're talking about, as Emily mentioned, the practical application of artificial intelligence to GRC. And this is a relatively new topic, even though I feel like people have been, it's all anyone's talking about for the past 6 or 7 months, ever since the introduction of ChatGPT by the company OpenAI back in November of 2022. But before we jump in too far with the specific presentation, we do have a poll we want to start with. It should be coming up. There we go. So have you used large language models like ChatGPT? And we can see kind of a range where roughly about 46% have yet to use it. I played around with it is around 30%, use it occasionally for work to 20%, 21%. And then a very small fraction right now, around 5 to 6, are using it extensively with the daily work. And this really seems to line up with what we see from a lot of the clients that we talk to whenever we give this presentation. I think the very first time we gave this was back in February or March. And at that point, the number was 90% that have yet to use it or really were unfamiliar with it. So over the course of just a few months, the amount of use has grown drastically. And I think that's one of the amazing things about what we're seeing with the ChatGPT, the OpenAI technology, is that it has changed the way people work with technology and their experience with it. And what we found is as we began giving this presentation, as we began talking to people, it became a very emotional experience with people, more so than I ever found with any technology before it. And we found a range of emotions, from people being shocked, surprised, joy, even a little bit of anger or hostility towards it, from kind of a place of fear. But there was a trend there. And so what we did is we hired a photographer and we commissioned a piece. We said, we want you to capture individuals in their first artificial intelligence experience, particularly around ChatGPT. And we've been doing this now for a few months. We have 5 subjects or models. All 5 individuals are real people. They had never experienced ChatGPT. We did not coach them on how they should interact, what type of emotions they should display, but just gave them some advice on what to type in. And so we have a nurse, a speech pathologist, a soccer coach, a veteran, and a graphic designer on the screen today. And so what we found is whenever we started, it started with a little bit of skepticism, a little bit just kind of seeking to understand, what is this technology? How can it be utilized? Jen, who's the nurse in the middle there, her statement was, is this that technology the high schoolers are using to cheat on their papers? And yes, that's exactly what this is. But for a lot of it was, how is this different than any other search engine, Google, Bing? And after they put that first prompt in and began to receive something back, that skepticism became more of a mild intrigue. Okay, this is different. It's typing a response back to me. It's almost like I'm interacting with a person who's giving me an answer in real time and beginning to fill that out. Nothing overly surprising yet. But then we encourage them to take a step further. Write an email, have it write you a poem. And this is my favorite moment. And it's very hard for our photographer to capture, but it's the moment that is the, oops, jump past one. It is the moment of shock, surprise, where it would actually provide something beyond that anything they've ever seen before, where it's not just providing a response, but it's drafting something unique, custom based upon those responses. And the emotion we get is that jaw down, overall surprise. And this only lasts for a brief second before it moves on to kind of the joy, the laughter, that giddiness. They enter a state of play, where over the course of 5-10 minutes, they'll just interact with it in different fashions. We may ask them to take it a step further. Take that poem you wrote and write it in a Southern accent. Write it as Shakespeare. Choose an actor that's kind of famous and put it in. And that's where we get to this little bit of goofiness, sometimes a little concern, might be a little creeped out at times, but in general, people enjoy playing with it. But as we get near the end of the session, we have them do one final request. It is, ask it to do something you do in your job, whether it is write an email, write a patient plan, write a coaching set plan, help design a marketing plan. And what we get from that is this moment of concern, of trepidation, of kind of a realization that what they're experiencing is about to change the way they work forever. It has the potential to not only change the way they work, but the way they interact with the internet, the way they interact with technology, the way they interact with other people, and that we're on the precipice of something new, on the precipice of a new age. In fact, the World Economic Forum called it the Fourth Industrial Revolution in 2015. And at that time, they came out with what they considered tipping points by 2025 to indicate that we've entered that new age. And you can see here that there's a percentage on the right-hand side that just indicates what is the potential likelihood, or what's their confidence rating that this will come true. So you have things like 1 trillion sensors connected to the internet, 80% of people with a digital presence on the internet, 5% of consumer products printed in 3D. So just a handful of different areas. But I've highlighted 2, and these are the 2 that are specifically reference artificial intelligence. 30% of corporate audits performed by artificial intelligence. The first AI machine on a corporate board of directors. Both of the 2 that have to do with AI actually have direct impact on governance, risk, compliance, which I think is a very unique fact when it looks at the potential impact it has on our industry. And one thing I'd call out around this 30%, I don't believe the belief here is that AI is going to do all audits for 30% of the organizations going forward, but more so that artificial intelligence will be leveraged in audits, whether it's automating control testing, analyzing data results, going out and pulling evidence back. All those things where artificial intelligence is currently working and continues to grow is where that 30% starts to come into place. And same thing with the AI machine on a corporate board of directors. I'm not sure how that's going to look like or what that might be, but it seems very likely that AI will be utilized by board of directors to help analyze data, provide analytics, and even probably help generate board reports in the very near future.
Yeah, and Andrew, the other interesting thing about this, at least what struck me, is your comment about this being a fourth industrial revolution. So being someone who's into history, you think about what other industrial revolutions kind of brought onto society. What happened? You had jobs or activities that human beings were performed, and machinery or automation was introduced to displace them. I mean, that goes back, to several iterations of the Industrial Revolution, or what was happening at those times. And again, this isn't to say, to Andrew's point, oh, now just take 30% of these audits and we'll just let AI do those. It's more about component pieces and parts where AI is going to start to come in and become a tool, a mechanism, but in some ways and shapes and forms, like you saw in the concern of our subjects there in our exercise, there may be a little bit of cause for concern or trepidation in kind of just determining, well, what does this exactly mean for me?
Excellent. And I think that when we look to apply artificial intelligence to GRC, there's significant gains that can be made from an efficiency perspective and from the overall work that's being done. A Harvard economist by the name of Michael Kramer came out with the idea of what's called the chain theory around automation. And it states that if you look at a process or a work that needs to be done, it can consist of multiple individual steps like links in a chain. And a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And usually what happens in workflow or anytime you have a process, it is the human element where you have high manual labor working is where that chain will break. So if you can automate functions, whether it is through artificial intelligence, utilizing a GRC solution like Onspring, or just removing elements of workforce using any other automation technology, you have the ability to strengthen that chain and potentially even expand it. And with that, you'll get better efficiency, better work product, and ultimately be able to move risk and compliance at your organization forward faster and easier.
Yeah, so to Andrew's point, many supporting technologies kind of appear within this chain or can be considered components of this chain. And again, to the point Andrew made, is that's going to help make that chain stronger. It's going to really help the human element kind of change their perspective or perform maybe in a different way. And one way to look at that is through the chain theory. Another way to look at how artificial intelligence might impact us as risk and compliance practitioners is to think about kind of our practice of integrated risk management almost as an ecosystem. And to me, there's no perfect representation, no more perfect representation of an ecosystem than a tree, right? So with a tree, you've got various sources of energy and nutrients. You have the sun, you have oxygen and carbon dioxide as that output and intake. You've got the nutrients in the soil, water, just the all of the components that are really nourishing that tree and allowing it to grow and thrive and live. The same could be said for integrated risk management. If you think about the different process components, the different people components, the technology components, these are all comprising what really amounts to a very intricate ecosystem. And so when we think about, again, AI and what does this mean in the realm or in the world of integrated risk management or compliance, we, at least in the research we've been doing and kind of from what we've been seeing and hearing, it's not expected that AI is just going to come in and supplant all of these other things. It's going to become another component, another potential source of nutrition, or another source of energy that ecosystem will be able to feed off of. So it's something that, if used correctly, can actually really enhance and strengthen that ecosystem of integrated risk.
And I think what's important about this too, if you look at all those different bulbs on the tree of different areas, not all of them are going to have the need for the exact same artificial intelligence solution. And this is where, when we look at what's available on the market, for most people, AI, the only thing they think of is Chat GPT. And a lot of today will be talking about utilizing large language models by Chat GPT, but the universe of artificial intelligence is large and is rapidly expanding. And so we received permission from Cobus Grayling, who is a artificial intelligence researcher, to utilize his information in this slide. And what this is showing is various what's called a large language model, which is like ChatGPT, in different applications. So we have everything in here from writing assistants to content and idea creation to data-centric tooling, as well as in the lower right-hand corner, different models and hubs. We have like OpenAI, where you're finding that ChatGPT in some of those public-facing AIs that most people are familiar with. But what I like to highlight here is that it is a vast world of artificial intelligence that we need to make sure that when we're applying AI, the answer isn't always ChatGPT. There is a right tool for the right timing for the right place. And as we've been exploring this over the past 6-7 months of how we can leverage ChatGPT, it's been as much exploration of what it can do, but also of what it can't or shouldn't do. And so what we've come up with is this idea of, when trying to figure out when to apply ChatGPT or any of these language models, is the blank page challenge. What ChatGPT does really well is fill in content with a short prompt. It is, I've heard it referred to as the best autocomplete you've ever experienced. So similar to on your phone, when you start typing a message and it suggests the next word, that's roughly how these large language models like ChatGPT work, where it is, you provide it a prompt and it is saying what is the best likely next word, and can fill in thousands of words thereafter, or whatever you kind of script it to do. So when in the space of GRC, it is, if we're looking at where can we apply ChatGPT, it's not as much around detailed data analytics or potentially reviewing all of your data, but there's very targeted approaches where it begins to populate content based upon the prompts that you provided. And at Central, we have started playing around with different AI use cases, and we're going to demo some of these today regarding how you can actually enable certain aspects here directly inside Onspring.
Yeah, and so while Andrew pulls that up, I think I'll call back to the title of this presentation, A Practical Application of AI in GRC. It's not the practical application or the only practical application. We want to make sure that that's pretty apparent here, because this concept of using a large language model to create these prompts and to gather this information based on how we prompt the engine, that's going to be something that is kind of an initial foray or a potential initial first step into the process.
And so we have 3 we're covering today. The first one is around policies and the ability to generate a policy based upon criteria provided. And we have 3 pre-recorded videos that Jason's going to talk through here. So you're going to see me sharing my screen in just a second.
All right.
And Jason, if you can just let me, there we go.
You go right ahead. All right,
All right.
So we're going to use Onspring as an example here. So in this particular use case, think about, I need to establish a new policy. And in this case, I'm wanting to establish a new policy around user access. I'm filling in the required information within Onspring. And then one of the critical components, at least how we've designed our solution, is to queue that record. This is going to let ChatGPT, or actually let the AI hub that we've created, know that we now have a prompt. We have information that we want to get back from ChatGPT. And now what you can see is we actually have a full-blown policy statement with just kind of the general different components. We've asked for information about different control standards that are applicable. Give us a purpose, give us a scope, right? So just with one simple prompt, one set of words, we actually requested and got back what at least on the surface looks like the beginnings of a very robust policy. Now, again, is this policy the one that we should absolutely use? That's not at all what we're suggesting. But to Andrew's point, think about it as that really significant and that really powerful autocomplete feature. Get you going in the right direction.
And to Jason's point, what we say, particularly when it comes to blank page challenges, after it drafts that first version, it may get you 60, 70, even 80% of the way there, but it's never the full solution. It always requires the human touch for review, at least currently. I would highly encourage it. There's some sort of review around it. And we'll provide some additional considerations here in just a moment on why that's the case. So I'm going to go here to the next one. And on this one, we are doing the legal translation. So let me pull that up.
Right. Yeah. So when Andrew talks about legal translation, for anyone who's ever evaluated or tried to read a legal document or a detailed regulation, I don't need to tell you that sometimes the way it's worded can be a little bit verbose. There could be some terminology and language in there that's a little bit hard to interpret. So one of these use cases involves taking existing information, i.e., the exact language of the law or the regulation or the authority document. Again, we'll check that little box to queue up the request into the AI hub, which will then queue the large language model. And what we've asked for is a plain language business translation of that particular law or regulation. So what it's doing is taking the actual legal wording of the regulation and giving us sort of a common or a layman's description of what that regulation is telling us. Again, in this type of situation, when you have a very prescriptive regulation, and then you're getting the information back in plain English, it does not certainly hurt, and we would always recommend validating and reviewing that information to ensure its accuracy and ensure that it kind of aligns with what your legal department might say are the requirements of that regulation. But it makes it very attainable in a very short amount of time.
All right. And now the final one that we have today is around risk statements. And this is particularly valuable when you start talking about filling in enterprise risk, or where you just need to start with that risk title and beginning to fill in the rest of the details. So I'll go ahead and get this queued up, Jason, for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So to Andrew's point, we want to generate a risk statement, but in this case, we're not just going to generate a risk statement. We're also going to ask the language model for any recommendations based on the information it has about how we should rate that risk. So it's not just restricted to text information that's going to come back and forth. We can also ask it to give us potentially an impact rating, a likelihood rating. Give us a description of the risk. Tell us what some of those impacted laws and regulations are. In this particular case, within our prompt, we've said, can you give us some NIST controls that will help us, kind of design activities to help us reduce or manage this risk? And again, I mentioned the risk ratings. Like, give us a recommendation. Again, I think a common theme here is let's use this as that starting point. Let's review that. Let's prompt it. Let's just kind of make sure that the risk statement kind of meets our expectations. But whether that's a risk at the enterprise level in your ERM program, whether that's an internal audit specific risk on a particular engagement, this is a very powerful tool to, again, get you moving in the right direction and help accelerate that time frame of the analyses that you guys are required to do.
Thanks, Jason. Now, I'm going to open back up the slide deck, but there was one question. We're kind of holding on most questions till the end, but I did want to touch base on it. And it was that in the use case around laws and regs, if you were to get asked what are the sources for that, how would you answer it? And I think that's a very powerful piece here, is that particularly from the legal translation one, what we are doing is we are actually providing the specific language in the prompt. Of here's the law or reg. So that way we can avoid a little bit of that it trying to go out and capture and bring that in directly. So that's how we're accommodating that, just to call that out right now.
Yeah, and actually it's a perfect segue into these key considerations that we've called out, because up until this point we've kind of showed you mechanically how it works, and we're actually going to talk a little bit more detail about how we've made that work and some of the considerations we've made and the ways we've addressed these things. But as with any new technology, as with any new way of doing things, you must take the good with the bad, so to speak. So what are the considerations that at least we've been thinking about in terms of leveraging, for example, a large language model to help kind of drive some of our key risk management activities. The first one there that we're calling AI hallucination. It's what you would imagine from that term. It's taking what the AI or what the large language model is giving us and just kind of accepting it as fact. It's the old adage of, well, I found it on the internet, it must be true. Well, the large language model told me this, it must be true. That is something you need to be very careful of, because any large language model, whether it's ChatGPT or Bard or a private self-contained large language model, is really only going to be as good as the information that's being fed in. So whatever you're getting back out of there, it's always important and always a good idea to really consider, hey, is this factual information? Can I rely on this, or to what extent can I rely on this? Again, great accelerator, but the hallucination is, and maybe this isn't all it seems to be.
In this one, I think I have a few examples in this one. So in a past life, I'm an attorney by trade and spent a lot of time doing legal research and pulling laws and regulations around specific topics and trying to populate actually a GRC solution. And so one of the early use cases I attempted was trying to give it a legal citation, like give me 25 or give me the California Privacy Act and provide me this section. And sure enough, it populated Onspring with that detail, but upon comparing it to the actual law, it didn't line up at all. It made it up. It is inclined to provide you an answer whether it's correct or not. And so that's one of those times where we begin to understand, here are some of the limitations around using ChatGPT in its current version. Now, it will continue to grow and expand, and as we can connect into broader internet, the different networks, and potentially target specific websites, we can begin to adjust that. But there is that consideration. There was an attorney very recently who used ChatGPT to write an entire legal brief and submit it to the court on a tort case that he was going against the airline on. And it even made citations to specific legal cases and gave the quotes that he needed and helped build his case. However, when the opposing counsel received it, they couldn't find these cases. They asked him for where they were. It turns out ChatGPT just made them up. Just fake cases. He is now going through the sanctions process with the New York Bar Association. And I have not seen what his final penalty was, but it's really devastated his legal career and his overall firms. So we always say is that, as Jason mentioned, is hallucination is very real. Be cognizant of it in what use case you're utilizing it, and have that second pair of eyes on it. It should be considered the accelerator, not the final end product.
Exactly. Yeah. And then that kind of leads us into the second consideration that we've called out, which is bias. And when I think about bias, and Andrew and I have talked about this quite a bit, I think about bias sort of on both sides, right? There's bias in the sense of, I am the individual who's prompting the language model. How I write that prompt, or how I craft or position my question or my statement, is going to definitely have an influence on what the model gives back to me, right? So I must consider, am I giving the appropriate level of context? Am I giving all of the context that's required in order to get a meaningful response back? There is also the bias on the side of the model itself, and we've already alluded to it, the fact that these models are being, kind of slowly but surely, or I guess fastly but surely, kind of refined over time. They're gathering more information, they're learning off of that information, but it's only as good as the information that's being provided in there. So that's a key consideration is, how am I prompting that engine? How am I crafting this prompt, and what should I expect back given the information I have or have not given the large language model prompt? And then what are the sources of the information comprising that model? What's coming back to me, and should I consider what its data sources are? I think that's a really key important element with any data set is, where is this data coming from, and kind of what's the validity of
it? And I think there's specific use cases here where bias is actually probably going to be even a little more challenging to manage. And this is something I think when you move in with eyes wide open. So things like legal translation, you're probably a little bit safer around it. Same with maybe risk statements. But if you're going to be utilizing artificial intelligence in the HR space to evaluate people, I think you're moving into that very dangerous side of artificial intelligence. And I know there's a question out there regarding ethics around AI, and a lot of it has to do with the application of it and where you're using it, and how you're utilizing it. And so it is, I think with all the considerations, and we'll get to the last one here in a second, it's not a stop everything. It is a proceed with caution. And I think that's the most important piece that we can kind of stress around that is it's not all it's not all perfect, but there's a big upside if you can use it correctly.
Yeah, I think that question about ethics is quite valid, and I think it's something that's always going to arise when we're heading into uncharted territory. The artificial intelligence language model itself, provided there are no nefarious forces coding it and building it, is not in and of itself unethical, but the applications of it or the way people are leveraging it or misusing it certainly could, those boundaries could be crossed pretty quickly. I think a pretty obvious one, but one that is most certainly worth mentioning is our last consideration, which is around data privacy and security. So a lot of how you approach this will certainly depend on what language model in this example that you're querying. Is it something that's internal and self-contained? Okay, there's a little bit more safety there. It's within your network. It's only accessible by your people in your organization. Or is it, for example, Chat GPT and something that's public? So considering what information is being provided, keep in mind that if you provide Chat GPT information and a prompt, it now has that information. It's going to keep it and it's going to use it to continue to build. So if you're starting to worry about people providing it with proprietary information or information that's non-public or what have you, definitely a concern, definitely something that needs to be addressed and a key consideration. And that actually leads us to our second poll question for today. So we were really curious, in terms of the data privacy concerns for those, I guess, those of you who have played around with ChatGPT or similar programs, have considered using it in your work. What are your thoughts in terms of how what the implications of that, or how concerned you might be about that? Andrew, you have that. Perfect. Yeah, and this is just kind of looking at the votes coming in. Similar to our first one, you notice that the distribution is about the same, right? We've got the people who, hey, I'm not worried. I've thought about it. I've thought through the security concerns. Probably guessing those are some of the same people who are using it routinely in their everyday work. As we get down to the bottom, though, I think you start to see kind of that great unknown. Like, I do have concerns about this. What am I giving it? And how is it using that information? How does it know if I'm the one who provided that information? Is that traceable back to me? These are the thoughts we've had and the thoughts that we've considered in kind of going down this road.
And that's in large part of how we've crafted building out these integrations with Onspring. Because what we found when we first started saying, let's move that forward with this path of integrating Chat GPT, large language models, directly into Onspring, there was multiple different paths. And the first pass was we can just connect the two directly. But we ran into some major concerns, major roadblocks around proper prompting of how we draft our statements, as well as concerns around proper security in what information is being provided. So ultimately, what we ended up with was what we call Central AI Hub. And it creates a nice middle solution between Onspring and the AI language models to provide to meet some of those considerations that we're talking about. And inside the hub is where we do all of our prompt engineering, where you may have noticed in the demo that Jason only typed a few words, user access, yet it spit out a whole form of detailed information around it. And that's because behind the scenes, we're providing additional detail regarding the company, but not providing names or any specifics. We're including some additional details around how we want it structured, where we want specific information to go. And then on top of that, we added another level that we use to protect privacy, where if someone types in something that we're concerned about. So if someone put in Central, because we don't want our name directly inside the large language model, we're going to automatically replace that with consulting firm. And we have a series of phrases and words that we can begin to pull out, as well as potentially like social security numbers, phone numbers, those type of PII information that can hide it from us. So we're trying to address some of those security and privacy concerns. But again, it's probably not 100% foolproof from an end user from going in and just providing way too much information, or if they go directly to ChatGPT and begin to do it. But it provides additional safety and security around it to remove some of those concerns. The other piece we found is that we're taking data from Onspring, where it's a structured format that is excellent for reporting, filling in, and reading it, and pushing it into an AI model like ChatGPT, where it's unstructured. It's providing responses back in a paragraph form. And how do we take that and provide it and put it into the correct spot? Because there's multiple fields that need to be filled in. And so the AI hub helps us break those apart and push it back into the correct spots and get the AI to properly integrate between those two. And one other call I'll make here is that we're also very concerned about that. Is ChatGPT the flash spot of the month? Will there be the next ChatGPT? Is it going to be Google Bard? Is it going to be something else? And so we needed that capability to not just directly integrate with one solution, but integrate with multiple different models, enabling the end user or enabling the company to choose which language model they want to work from, whether it's Google Bard, ChatGPT, or a future one that we have yet to define.
Yeah, that's a great point, Andrew. It's not a one size fits all solution, right? We're not always talking about the same programs on either side, but what sits in the middle, when Andrew talked about that hub, that is really where the interconnection kind of gets refined. That's where it gets secured, and that's where the pass through kind of is managed. So that's something that gives you more control over how this works. So what's the approach for addressing this? Well, first off, defining those use cases. So what problem are we actually trying to solve? So we've given a couple of basic examples today. That kind of prompting using just a few bits and pieces of information, creating a risk statement, translating a law or regulation, and so forth. So identify that challenge, identify the use case that you're looking to solve or that you think a large language model could potentially help you solve. Before going into anything like this too, it's always a good idea to kind of build that infrastructure from a policy and procedure standpoint in terms of identifying, calling out what those privacy concerns are, what's going to be allowable, what's not allowable, and how are you as an organization or a group going to specifically address that. From there, obviously, there's the landing place, kind of the prompting and the landing place for these types of queries and requests. And in this case, it's a GRC solution such as Onspring. So you want to have fields where you can either capture the prompt information, and some of that prompting might be managed inside of a central hub. You may want to pull some of that prompting capability and present that to your end user. So build that intake and that capability to issue that request. Maybe put some workflow around that so when results come back in, hey, we can have a few people get their eyes on this and do some validation and some editing so that it fits more of your organization's needs or is more closely representative of what you need. And then certainly that's where the integration happens, the passing back and forth of information between the GRC solution and this AI hub. And then within the AI hub, this is where you're going to be effectively telling the hub, this is where I want to go send my query to. Here are the kind of the static or the standard prompts or components that I want to wrap around these prompts. We want to build in certain privacy filters, maybe certain words or certain data formats never see the light of day. We want to kind of catch them, replace them, redact them if that makes sense. But that can all be configured and managed within this central hub. So effectively, you've got this kind of controlled point in between these two resources, the resources that your users are using, and then the resource where you're calling or prompting the information. And then you can place a great deal of control over how that interaction works.
And thank you, Jay. And I think what's important here as we wrap up today is just a few key takeaways that I just want to leave everyone with around this is that artificial intelligence is rapidly changing, expanding, and modifying how we work. And with that said is that where we are today is not going to be where we are 6 months from now, 1 month, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. And we're not quite sure what the world will look like. But we do know artificial intelligence is going to be a big place in the world and big place in the workplace. And so with that said, I always encourage people to start going out and exploring artificial intelligence and potential use cases, both from a GRC perspective or risk compliance, but even go beyond it. I subscribe to multiple different newsletters that feed me kind of daily news regarding changes in the AI workspace, what's coming out, what are some of the trends, just to try to stay on top of where things are heading, because it will be such a big impact in the near future. The second one, and this is kind of a key one, this goes all for all the risk and compliance professionals on the call today, is define an organizational policy around artificial intelligence. When ChatGPT first came out, there was a trend for people to quickly jump on it, but there's also just as big of a trend to just ban it until we figure out what this is going to be utilized from organizations. And it's this balance of, we find there's value, but we do have significant concerns we need to address. How do we walk that line, and what is our organization's stance on it, in crafting a policy around it to help protect the organization's secrets, the customers, and all the stakeholders involved? And finally, this is the last one. I suggest this in not just artificial intelligence, but anytime you step forward in a new process, put in a new technology, you bring in Onspring, it is start simple. Artificial intelligence, as you saw, I think on an earlier slide, there were multiple different language models out there, multiple different AI use cases that you could utilize. But you have the capability right now to leverage ChatGPT and others in very simple use cases to help accelerate your work. There is a potential out there to purchase your own large language models and have your organization build it out, provide it with data, but it comes at a significantly higher cost. So if you can begin to show wins with some of the simple use cases, the simple leveraging the public models in a safe, responsible manner, you can begin to grow that your understanding of the use case, the ability to move GRC forward using the chain theory, and be successful in your job in leveraging it and beginning to understand it. Now, with that, want to thank everyone for your time. We are going to have some time for questions today. We do have our contact information on the screen right now. Please feel free to reach out to myself, to Jason, to Emily with any follow-up questions that we don't address today. But Emily, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so we've got quite a few questions, a lot about ethics, a lot about regulation. But before we kind of dive into those, I would really like to ask you guys, let's say you're somebody in an organization, you say, I think I've got a couple use cases for a ChatGPT to integrate into what I'm doing. And in my mind, they all make sense, right? I can come up with policies from scratch. I can come up with all these different things. Is there like a buffer of like 3 questions you should ask yourself first to say, is this really right for me? Are we really ready as an organization to pull the trigger on something like this before I exert the effort of going through the motions of building a plan and everything that comes with it?
I think one of the biggest ones, and this holds true for any technology bringing in, is having the foundational processes in place, your methodology. What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to do? AI won't solve your foundational issues, and I don't think it will do so in the near future. It's just like if you buy Onspring and leverage all the amazing capabilities it has, it's not going to solve a bad process. Process first is always going to be most important, and utilizing technology, Onspring, artificial intelligence, is going to help you sustain it, help you accelerate and work better and more efficiently. But it all depends upon a solid foundation to start from.
Emily, to add to that, I would say that, before embarking on such a thing, we've called attention to it a little bit, but I would probably CC my chief privacy officer or information or consult the information security group and just kind of make sure they're aware of my intended use case, right? Here's the information I'm looking to gather. Here's how I'm intending to gather it and how I'm intending to control it. I think there's a lot to be gained by engaging folks on that side as early in the process as possible, so that they can properly guide you, point you to any existing policies, or say, whoa, we should probably have a policy around that.
Mm-hmm. Great. There was a question about whether ChatGPT is available on Onspring right now. So from a native perspective, ChatGPT is not natively integrated with Onspring, and we've chosen that because we've essentially let every customer decide what type of integration they want to have with Onspring. So if you are interested in doing some type of ChatGPT integration, that's when we bring in Andrew and Jason and talk about how are you going to use it? How do we protect yourself from a privacy security perspective? So that's where we stand on that.
And I think there's a,
go ahead. Sorry, Andrew.
Mind if I add one piece on that? And I think a big piece around that is, I think Onspring's taken a responsible approach on this too, is I've seen some organizations try to do this integration. I don't think they have thought through the privacy and security concerns. So anytime you're looking at a technology that is claiming to have ChatGPT enabled, it must immediately follow the question of what information does the AI have access to? How is it provided? And what does that channel look like? So if you're making that step forward, consider those pieces. The data privacy security was number 3 on our considerations, but since day one, I have been hammering home to our team, to our development, and around this is that if we can't solve data privacy and security, we can't do AI integrations, because the number one concern I have for any GRC is that you have a lot of confidential information at your fingertips. We can't just provide that over to ChatGPT to craft things. So I'll kind of put that out there, is that the integration's available, we can put it in place, but we always need to do it responsibly and making sure we're solving that blank page challenge and not providing too much detail. So sorry, Mel, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, no, that was great. Yeah. We've got a question specific to financial markets, banking industry, and third-party vendor management. Do you guys foresee any unique considerations for that particular industry sector in relation to ChatGPT or generative AI?
I'm not sure I'm ready to go unique and on that, but I would say that it's probably elevated around the privacy security elements and what data is providing. I know you've heard me harp on this a couple times now in the last 30 seconds, but with what information that you're providing to it, particularly when it comes to financials, there's an elevated risk around it, and you have additional regulators monitoring it. There are a lot of regulations or talks of regulations coming out of how we regulate AI appropriately. I think that could be an evolving space, but what I would encourage is, if you're going down this place, is take a less risky approach right now, making sure that you're utilizing it to the extent that you can get that accelerator, but without providing significant data around it. Jason, anything else that you would add to that?
No, I would agree. Especially when you consider it, and it's a fair point, because that is always good. What Emily alluded to is always going to be, one of the most scrutinized and probably most heavily regulated areas. And I would imagine that, I would not anticipate them being any more lax on how they're kind of placing some oversight or some regulation around how these technologies can be used. Now, we haven't seen it truly kind of manifest itself yet, but if the past doesn't always equal the future, but if you really look at that industry, financial services, financial technology as a whole across our history, definitely they've been a little bit more restrictive, a little bit more conservative, and I would suspect that would hold true in this situation.
Yeah. All right, next question for you. Andrew, I want to go back to the example you used about sending prompts into the system to generate content. There was a question that came through about how do you manage or maintain those prompts so that they don't kind of snowball out of control without some type of guardrail in place?
Well, and this is where I think leveraging a GRC solution like Onspring to help do this is a great way to do that, because if you give individuals access to just ChatGPT to go out and write their own prompts, and you need it to be a specific format, you lose that control, or you're relying on them to copying a template. What we've done with the AI Hub and Onspring is that we've crafted what they can put into Onspring. It could be a single field, or it could be a selection of values. And then from there, we control the prompts on the back end and can manage what that looks like and can evolve those over time. We're currently working on, we have yet to finish it yet, but the ability to have an Onspring application where you give your admin the capability to manage that prompt engineering directly inside Onspring, and then utilize that to kind of guide that prompt. So you have visibility to what those prompts are, but it's restricted on who can actually change it. And that's just using Onspring's role security capabilities, as well as its email and API capabilities to integrate into the broader workflow. But that's really the big use case of why like that middleware becomes so important. So
yeah. So we had a question come through. If you're using ChatGPT to generate some of this content, how are you citing your sources if that was a requirement?
Yeah. So ChatGPT does not do a good job citing its sources. It's one that we have found very, very quickly, and that's one of those limitations we need to be cognizant of going forward. However, we are monitoring changes to how ChatGPT functions. There's a lot of expectations like GPT-4 being able to solve some of that, but it doesn't seem to be the case. It does provide a broader set of information. In fact, all the prompts you're seeing today and all the feedback was coming directly out of GPT-4. What I think is going to be a big tipping point around this is the ability to connect specific GPT models to the internet and getting live data in there. And we're watching to see how that plays out and how we can potentially enable that. But currently, from a citation perspective, I wouldn't trust a citation out of GPT. And any citation I gave it, I would go check and making sure it's accurate, because as we've talked about with AI hallucinations, oftentimes it comes up with something that's not true.
Yeah, and Emily, what I'd add to that is, I've seen a lot of good questions come up, and there's some kind of age-old issues and questions. Are we, creating bias by eliminating bias? Are we being ethical by using, artificial intelligence? Are we properly researching and doing our due diligence to cite the sources? I think if you remove artificial intelligence as the object of what we're talking about here, those same concerns and those same issues certainly exist in every facet of the work that we do, even in the manual paper-based work that some of us are still doing. The reason I say that is, I think when new technologies emerge, for example, let's just ChatGPT, it can do these seemingly amazing things, but that doesn't mean because it's a new, exciting and interesting technology, it doesn't mean that we can just eliminate all of these concerns right up front. So I think the folks who are asking those questions are definitely asking the right questions. I will completely be honest and say, I don't know. I don't know what the ethical implications are. I can guess, I can start to do, research and consult others. I think in this particular situation, the best kind of remedy to those types of concerns is getting that kind of groupthink going in your own organizations, not relying on one or two individuals to kind of dictate or set the direction. This needs to be a organization-wide and organization-level decision and conversation, because it does have wide-ranging implications. I would want to talk to my privacy officer, my general counsel, my head of human resources, so I can understand, hey, what are the implications that you see? Because it's only going to be with those perspectives that you can adequately address those types of questions and concerns, which are quite legitimate.
Yeah. There was one question that came through, and I think it is worth repeating and just reinforcing how the technology works to reinforce the security implications of pulling data in from a ChatGPT, for example. It does have the capability to extract your own data back into the world. And that's why when you set this up, that's why Andrew and team have really focused on how to protect your own data so that it is not used back into the AI generation.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yep, definitely.
A couple of people have asked questions about recommendations for the best place to stay up to date on news about what's coming out in AI. Do you guys have any suggestions on where you're sourcing your information?
So I don't know if it's the best place, but I do have a couple places I follow. I'm receiving a newsletter from a company called TLDR AI, and they provide me a daily newsletter. One of I think my business partners has another one he follows, and then there's a couple podcasts out there that I listen to that provide like daily briefings on changes to artificial intelligence, which has been new content daily. It seems to be not a problem right now, which is speaking of how fast it's changing, but it is taking me from a spot of I'd say little knowledge about AI in the past year to feeling like I'm very comfortable understanding of how we can apply it and the trends and where we're going in a very short order. It's just one of those that we jump in and start learning. Jason, I don't know if you're following any other
Yeah,
newsletters.
there's another site that I recently became interested in. It is a subscription service, but it's called The Intelligence Age, and it's just ai.theintelligenceage.xyz. Great, I love that little instead of .com.xyz. Apparently, that's a thing now. That has all kinds of kind of breaking news and analysis of what's happening in this kind of world of artificial intelligence that, as Andrew mentioned, is just changing. Multiple times a day.
Yeah.
And to that point, I see one person asked for books, and I do not have. I tried doing books, but I found them to be, even if they were written in the past year, a lot of them were a little out of date already.
Yeah.
So it's tough to find up to date information. Where I'm finding more so articles and newsletters seem to be a little bit better on that front.
Yeah.
Sorry, Emily, I didn't mean to take your question.
Yeah, I was just going to mention there's a weekly podcast that is called Hard Fork that's put out by investigative journalists at the New York Times, and I forgot the other organization that they're from, but they only focus on technology, and their topics each week cover what is new, what's being released, so they get behind the scenes views of Bard, and their last interview was with the Google CEO, who was talking about how he's using his own generative AI tool and its ability to write airlines and request flight returns or write performance reviews for employees and things along those lines. So Hard Fork's a good one to check out too. So we are just about out of time here, so we're going to wrap. I will let everybody know that yes, this has been recorded. We will send out a recording so that everybody can share it with their teams. Andrew and Jason have also volunteered. If anybody's interested in doing a work session to kind of tease out how ChatGPT or another large language model could be integrated into Onspring and how it could work with your GRC program, they are available for work sessions after this. So we'll send out an invite. If you want to book a work session, just reply back and we'll get something on the calendar and you guys can kind of explore where it might take you and your organization. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we were glad to have you.
Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Everyone.